Hi, and welcome to the semifinals of the UTM Asian Parliamentary International 2023. I'll be your chair for this round. My name is Denise. Paneling alongside me, we have Alicia from UT Mara as well as Saleh from Taylor's. Congratulations to the teams for making it this far. In proposition, we have Universitas Indonesia 1, and in opposition, we have UTM 2, University Technology Malaysia 2. On the motion that reads before us, well, it's quite long, so I will just say it's the donation motion. We shall begin this debate. Speakers are encouraged to time themselves. I will only write time when it is 7:15. Thank you very much. And with that being said, and without further ado, I'd like to invite the Prime Minister to begin their speech for the topic before the House. Here, here.
Yeah, making sure that I'm audible.
Yes, you are. You may proceed. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for the confirmation. Yeah, hi, I'm Risky. Introducing myself first before proceeding to the um substantive speech. Yeah, I'm going to be the Prime Minister. Several things. Pronouns are he, him. POI preferred method is use the raise hand feature or just POI through the chat because I will be looking at the chat, so no worries on that. Um, yeah, I guess that's all, right? Okay.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I don't think we'll do the introductions because I think everyone's kind of familiar with each other, or if everyone consents, I think yeah, we should do the gender pronoun introduction anyway. For the sake of good courtesy, thank you very much for reminding me about that, PM. Hello, your introduction and pronouns, and I'll move to the panel last. Hello, your introduction, please.
Malik, are you here?
Oh, hi, hi. Sorry. My internet got cut off, right? So I'm supposed to do an introduction, right?
Yep, let's make this quick. Let's
Yeah,
start the
right.
debate.
So,
Yep.
hi, my name is Malik Araf. I'm the first speaker for UTM2. So my preferred pronouns are he and him, and I prefer POIs through, unmuting your mic.
With that being said, Deputy Prime Minister.
Yep, sorry. Hi, my name is Jones Anderson. Please second speaker, him pronouns. Thank you.
Your preferred POI style as well.
Hey, I'm so sorry. Through chat, please. Thank you.
All right, thank you. No worries. That being said, Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Yes, hello. I'm Tanzim Junaid. Prefer pronounce he, him, and preferably verbal POIs, as I won't miss the chat. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And for the last government speaker, Government Whip.
Hi, I'm Hezron. POI to the chat. I'm gonna take one from minute 5 later on. Pronounce Hide. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that being said, the final speaker from Opposition Whip.
Hi, I'm Mubashir. I'll be the op whip. For her pronouns are she, her, and verbal POIs.
All right, thank you very much. With that being said, my name is Denise, and my pronouns are she and her. Alicia, you may proceed.
Hi, I'm Alicia, pronounced she, her, but do refer to the panel as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello,
And
I'm
finally,
Saleh.
Salih.
My pronouns are no preferred pronouns.
All right, thank you all, everybody, for the cooperation. And without further ado, Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for the welcome. Starting my speech in a while. Wait a sec. My notes are pretty messy. My setup. Okay, starting my speech in three, two, and one. 2 points of setup before I proceed, right? Number one, what does it mean when we talk about obligation to donate in this motion, right? Two things on this one. I think that when we talk about obligation to donate, that means that there is an inherent pressure or obligation to donate by local organizations or governments to help aid their own people, and also for respective international communities to aid their respective countries. For instance, that's what government is trying to defend in this. Motion never been proud to propose. But secondly, understand that under opposition, in terms of like obligation to donate, meaning that international citizens are expected to donate towards like countries or areas where like the impacts are currently are occurring. I think that the motion context slide mentions it perfectly, like how earthquakes in Turkey, Syria, Ukraine, and like the conflicts in Ukraine, etc., are currently happening. Therefore, there is an inherent rising like trend of civilians are being obliged to actually donate to do that, right? But second point on my setup, what does the trend mean in the current status quo, right? I think that the trend means that in order for people to actually donate, I think that the pressure comes externally. So most of the times when people are expected to donate or obliged to donate, it also comes with the criticism that when some people do not donate, then most likely they're mostly then consequences are going to come on their way. Either they're going to be deemed as less valuable or less contributive by society, etc. We're going to further mechanize this in the argumentation, but this is an important point of setup to actually picturize to you how it's going to look like on both sides of the house, because each houses respectively have to define the way that they're going to protect the motion. Exactly with that, very proud to propose, right? I'm going to bring one main contribution in this debate. I'm going to talk about like the inherent obligation of citizens and how it's going to in citizens and organizations, and how the system under governments at the house is going to inherently create betterment in respective states and respective countries where conflicts may arise or may not arise, and just inherently better government yeah allocation in government, right? So three layers in this one. Number one, what is the parameter of success or even justification in this particular argumentation, right? I think that the thing that we inherently have to protect in this specific debate or in this specific argumentation is the inherent obligation of local citizens and the inherent obligation of local governments or organizations to be able to contribute back to their respective states or respective locations, right? So understand that I think that everyone in this world, we're not free from the fact that we have to contribute back from our local governments. We're not free from contributing back to the people around us. I think that that's an inherent thing that an average reasonable person is supposed to understand, right? Second layer then, what is the problem in the current status quo and why is it not reflective of what's currently happening in the status quo, right? I have three main things to explain on this one. Number one, I think that it's very important to note that civilians are directly harmed by the development that the local government has, right? So understand that at the very least, the local government actually should have the incentive to help their own people. The local organizations are supposed to have the incentive to help their own people, right? I think that this might sound uncharitable in a sense or to some educators, but understand that this is inherently true. Why is it so that it's inherently true that civilians are directly harmed, or the safety of civilians are determined by government, right? I think that in times where countries are, uh, in times where countries are necessarily like under the crisis, I think that the biggest defense mechanism that governments are supposed to apply is either A, the policy that they're going to create, or B, even the facilities that they're able to make and how they're able to protect like the countries from the crisis that's going to go on. But three, I think that most importantly of all is the well-being of each civilians that exists within their respective countries. I think it's also that's very important that the fact that people live in different social classes and social economic status, I feel shows that there's also different there's a difference in power in how people are able to defend themselves or even try to live in the midst of crisis, right? Therefore, I think that at the end of the day, there is still a sense of like responsibility that governments and organizations are supposed to fulfill. But secondly, I think that the contributions of citizens or even like governments and organizations towards the less fortunate communities is a important thing to actually uphold in this debate, right? So who in the along with this argumentation, I'm going to like specifically define, right, who are the ones going to be donating locally in the sense that giving back to the people within, right? Three things: that A, it's mostly going to be the respective governments who have the connection to be able to secure better help. B, organizations that probably have branches in other nations, or organizations that have better connection to security, being able to secure connections from like any other organizations that probably seeks the urge for security or even stability, etc. But thirdly, I think that it's mostly going to be their own people, right? The people who are more capable, for instance, when a crisis happens, because understand that even the richer people who, which is a fiat, by the way, that they're most likely going to be the ones that are going to donate in this case, are the ones who can sustain themselves better in the middle of a crisis, right? What does this mean? That A, I think that government has more capability to secure aid and connection. This is like there is like links outside. For example, you can talk about NATO, you can talk about ASEAN in Southeast Asia, etc. I think that therefore the connection that they have is just way better than the average reasonable person that exists in the current state of school. Therefore, the obligation ultimately goes forward towards the government. But B, I think that organizations as well, because they have visions, because they have like missions that they have to fulfill. Therefore, at the end of the day, the obligation goes towards them to be able to protect their own people, to be able to also like fight for their rights, etc. But thirdly, I think that because like a lot of like more powerful like
POI.
rich people, or even like middle to no thank you, um at the end of the day, have like just a disparity of power between the poor people who are the most vulnerable, by the way, in this motion. I think that therefore there is a sense of like contribution that we should give back towards the people. But thirdly, I think that at the end of the day, crises happening in other countries are not like the responsibility of citizens in like other countries as well, right? What are the respective responsibilities that are supposed to uphold in respective countries, right? Three things. That A, I think that in developments in respective countries, there will be massive donations that are needed. This looks like even in the aftermath of like conflicts, etc., there needs to be a proliferation of being able to rebuild schools, rebuild local communities, houses, etc., in which like most likely the ones that are going to be harmed the most are the ones that are like hugely economically disadvantaged. I think like therefore these people, like the people who are able to contribute back, are the local governments or the local people that exist within their respective countries. But number two, I think that at the end of the day, there are still social movements that has to be assisted, because like they are literally suffering, or they're fighting for the rights of people who are also like suffering because of the probably the rich people who probably have already like capitalized upon the suffering of lower class people by paying them less, etc. Therefore, the responsibility goes back to the rich people to pay back these people. Thirdly, is regarding how there's like the crisis is inherently like not necessarily happening because of the people. Therefore, they have no incentive, or they don't necessarily have the responsibility to be able to give back to people. All of those reasons, very proud to propose.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for that speech. Now I'd like to call upon the Leader of the Opposition to begin the case for the negative in this debate.
All right, am I audible?
Yes, you are. You may proceed.
All right, so as mentioned before, I take my POIs verbally. So like starting in three, two, one. Right. So a few clarifications before I move on this debate. Right. Firstly, I understand that the opposition comes up to us and to talk about how apparently, you know, it's a responsibility of the government of countries to donate in big case and whatnot. Right. But I assure you that the responsibility of the countries of any world in general is still like visible on our side of the house, because understandably when any crisis happen in any other countries, people should come up and government should straight up, right? But the difference in model is what we propose is that we believe that there should be an obligation on the citizens too, on the personal citizens, to donate a personal amount of their finances, whether that's like any amount in general, to the causes, because apparently we believe that things might gradually or very exponentially improve over and whatnot, right? Secondly, they come up to us and they talk about how apparently this some sort of trend that's going on, and like it puts some sort of pressure, and it acts as a people, you can use it as a like medium of criticism on the other citizens and whatnot, right? So understandably, we tell you that this method of payment through the channels of citizens, by paying to various non-profits, or paying to various like international organizations too, is something that has zero consequences, right? Meaning that you you are paying from whatever money you have, and you're paying whatever money you possess from your personal finances or from your monthly expenditure or whatnot, and that is something that has no uh, faults in what case whatsoever, right? And whenever you stop that, you stop an important flow of money that's coming from an important channel, whatnot, right? Understand, before I move on, a few clarifications for these motions, right? Understand what happens during crises, because like understandably in any big crises, oh, before I move on, when we talk about the obligation of citizens to donate, we do not say that it's some sort of law that you have to donate for some causes and whatnot, right? Because apparently causes keep coming up because the world is in like facing a lot of issues in general, so you have to keep paying and whatnot, right? But we tell you that it's some sort of a mental and moral obligation for these citizens to pay, because firstly, we believe that when you pay, when you face a problem yourself, you would want help from other citizens of the world. And secondly, the amount you pay is very flexible, and it should have zero to like none impact on your personal finances, so helping them has no issues on your side of on their side, right? So when we say that we want citizens to like pay and the moral obligation to fall upon them, right? So what do we mean by this? We mean that they pay through various GoFundMe's or various NGOs or various other channels, except for the way the government is paying and whatnot, right? So what does this happen when what happens when this is happening in general, right? Understandably, in crises there are like a lot of issues that arise, like the earthquake in Turkey and whatnot, uh, issues like like shelter issues, like clothes issues, like drinking water and whatnot, right? So in the instances the citizens are obligated to pay, the moral obligation that exists tells gives areas for channels to like come out. Because what do I mean by this? I mean that various NGOs and various non-profits and various funding programs arise that cater to each problem separately and whatnot. So on the flip side, what happens when the government pays, and something that we believe that the responsibilities should exist on our side of the house too, right? When the government pays, we tell you that the system is very uh, the system is very long and complex, and in general very complicated, right? So the organizations that they do talk about, organizations like ASEAN or NATO or similar organizations that give funds from countries in moments of crisis, it's a point in time it's a point in time when the process is very long, right? So a government of a country donates to the international organization, then it sends the money to then the government that is in danger and whatnot, and then the money has to be distributed from the government to every person suffering in the crisis and whatnot, and which is a very long process in general. Right. On the other hand, whenever an obligated citizen pays, and whenever the entire sum of various citizens are like gathered together, we see that the sum that arises has the potential to make a significant difference, and the sum that arises eventually reaches to the people in person, or the people suffering that on the ground and whatnot, right? And um, so, what is the constructor that will prove from our side of the house? We tell you that the moral obligations should exist, and that is something that has multiple impacts on multiple paradigms of the crisis that the world faces. Right. So, how does it work? Firstly, understand that it works as a mutually supported transaction between citizens of different countries of the world, right? So, like I said before, that when you, as a citizen or a person of the earth, see that a crisis is happening at any point in earth, and you would want to help them, right? And similarly, when you face any similar crisis, or God forsaken, anything happens to your anything happens to the environment around you, you would want help from other people too, right? And this is why we believe that empathy and the sole emotion that works behind people that feel for the people in crises is should be something that should be acted upon, right? Like we have mentioned before, this is not something that we impose as laws, where apparently every citizen of any other countries is like obligated to pay for it, right? We tell you that this is a moral obligation that should exist on every citizen on whatnot, right? So when this happens, they have much more incentive to pay for these causes, and these countries get much more help in general. On the flip side, when the government does pay, they can't keep donating, because apparently I believe that no government, especially like governments of like developing countries or government of African countries, or like countries that don't have good economical back supporting, they don't have separate funds for donations and whatnot, right? So when they donate, they have to donate from their funds that have been allocated for like other sectors and whatnot. So when that happens, they're necessarily facing issues when it comes to funds and allocation of them, right? And the crises keep happening, right? Today we can see that in a few days back we saw the earthquake in Turkey. Who knows what's going to happen in the future and whatnot, right? So a government can't keep donating because they don't have unlimited funds, and it becomes problematic for governments of developing nations and whatnot, right? So in this instance, if the channel exists from the citizens where apparently they pay through their own methods and whatnot, there always is a cash flow that's still happening, right? There's always something that's still, like, and that's still talked about, awareness being created, and the citizens, are always morally obligated and, like, exist, have a peace of mind that whenever if they face any problems, they're gonna, like, get supported from their side of the house too, right? So what is the thing that we are trying to push from our side of the house? Firstly, we told you that the opportunity cost that we say is much more less on our side of the house, because there exist multiple channels of, payment, considering that, citizens um, have the moral obligation on them. We tell you that the burden on governments to pay is something much less on our side of the house, and this is why we are very proud to oppose.
All right, I'd like to thank the leader of the opposition for that speech. And to continue the case from the proposition, I'd like to call upon the Deputy Prime Minister for their speech. Hear, hear.
Ouch. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are. You may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, right. Operation Tomodachi helped Japan during the tsunami crisis. It was a very beautiful story. But if you notice one thing about the operation, it was incentivized by the US government and not the people. Hence the efficacy of the operation. The budget and the workers launched there are very efficient, all by the hand of the government. Let's take a look at another case like the 2004 in Aceh, Indonesia. Sure, Indonesia wasn't the best nation to give donation, but they fight for the citizen prosperity and then increase nationalism where other layers of society have the incentive to help them as well. These cases may seem small, but the benefits of your own government helping you and protecting you is huge. Op cannot talk about countries being unable to help themselves because there will be foreign help as well, which is voluntary based on the nation. But it's abhorrent for you to put an obligation on citizens who did nothing wrong to limit their agency and welfare to live in their own land. I'm going to talk about three things in this speech. One, obligations. Second, about the government in general. Lastly, I bring an extension about why government helping themselves bring better prosperity to citizens. First question then, about who have obligations. Observation number one. Their first claim is that government will still have obligations under both sides of the house. One, that's obviously not true, because exactly on your side, government lost their obligation when they feel a huge foreign citizen have the obligation instead and have the moral responsibility. Not them, because they are like the citizens are more privileged one, for example, or have more access to financial security, so they shift the responsibility. Like they shift the media that people are about those kinds of obligations for the government. Instead, the government told them, we don't really have much capacity. Our hands are already tied. So you have to shift the focus on this kinds of foreign citizens who have better obligations because they have like more privileged life, for example. Those kinds of shift makes you have no like actual accountability for the those kinds of. Wait, am I cutting off?
No, you were audible. All's good. Panel,
All right.
everything's okay on your end, right?
Yes, yes, yes. Sorry, I just saw the comments. Yep.
Uh, we want to restart the speech. It is about 1:40, or do we continue from there?
Thank you very much. Okay.
UTM2 opposition. Is it all right if we continue the speech, or would you rather a restart? Okay, with that being said, I believe you can proceed from where you were, which would be at 1:40. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Yep, thank you very much for the clarification. Anyways, I'll be starting in three, two, one. But secondly, yeah, first off, those kinds of government have those kinds of lasting obligations. Second, they talk about how donations are skewed in government. I think this is not true because exactly once you have like the more obligation or like the obligation in general for this kind of government to give donations, exactly those kinds of check and balance and accountability of donations for the government exists because those kinds of citizens have more like check and balance or have more social capital push for the government to like look at their accountability for like their financial check, for example, on how they give donations to those kinds of people who have certain earthquakes or certain tsunamis hit their provinces. Even if that's not true, even if government doesn't really have much capacity to help financially on their best case, I think on the out of the house, those kinds of like huge organizations like ASEAN, for example, or like other governments or like WHO or like all of these huge organizations can still have the ability to help because that's their main purpose for like them existing as an organization to help other countries as well. Observation number two. Let's talk about how the citizens have the more obligation to donate as well. One, your claim is different from the motion. The motion stated you're obliged to donate on your side. So people are forcefully donating to other nation. They don't necessarily have the relatability for that nation. Note that even if this is not true, it's metric. If there's people who want to donate due to sympathy or whatever, this happens on both sides regardless. But second, they added by saying you can help without troubling your finances. This means their benefit is marginal at best because you're pushing everyone to donate instead of letting them voluntarily donate. They will probably donate just for the sake of it on some like suspicious website, quite a small amount. But lastly, under our side of the house, on a comparison, OP criticizes these people or citizens who doesn't necessarily have good facilities in their own nation to give their income to someone else who have no relatability to themselves. So it's far more immoral under OP side to prove like to force people to limit their agency for their own betterment and welfare. Let's bite the bullet. I think even if like they have certain privileges or they don't like necessarily have certain like troubles or crises under their side, I think citizens have the right to have their own land and not a certain foreign country, and the right to have like better welfare than like usual. I think all those kinds of citizens still have their own like still on their own, like for example like struggles, for example, and all those things. I think they should also be protected. Observation, last observation. Talk about how moral obligations should exist. One, we're not saying they don't. People who feel certain sympathy that will also help. For example, when they look at the wildfires that are burned in like Australia, they're still going to donate towards this kinds of koalas, for example. Like people will still have certain sympathy of them volunteering, trying to help instead of being forced. I think we flip that logic. When you are trying to be forced and you're trying to be obliged or certain like donations, you're less likely to feel certain sympathy, or you're less likely to feel like you have the like huge like superior things that you need to donate, for example. Instead of under outside the house, when you like feel like you're the only person who wants to like really help those institutions, for example. So yeah. So why should the government or organization have the more responsibility, which is like more like our main concern? One, I think government have more informed decisions, right? Unlike foreign citizens, they don't know the sphere or the culture in certain areas. This means that they don't quite understand how the government works, what programs they should donate, whether or not the donation gives concrete benefit on the ground or got in someone's pocket. But second, let's weigh this. Both sides will have loopholes in the who they are donating and government not being sufficient enough, right? Under op, you tend to give donation to people that you're not sure their actual organization. You probably give $20 to some unknown programs and call it a day and say you have done enough. By this, it's not efficient. Under our worst case, government is corrupt. It's far easier to like call them out during times of crisis because these people still have media criticizing the gov, and media journalists will literally go to the street and interview them what government have done to help, considering they are the only actor that have the agency to help. So the accountability is far bigger. It's easier to check and balance the structured bureaucracy of a government rather than some donation website on the internet, which is what foreign citizens is going to do on their side of the house. So the likelihood of your like benefit being accrued or like your impacts being concrete is far more like worse on their outside the their side of the house in comparison to our side of the house, where you can have accountability and check and balance for the government if they are truly that corrupt from like international actors or even the citizens that are having these times of crisis. And before jumping on the second question, I'll take a POI. Right. Second question then about the government itself. I think government has the like ability to not be corrupt in a few ways. One, exactly because those kinds of times of crisis are very, very sensitive. A lot of citizens are going to be like a protest on the street, for example, talking about better welfare or like trying to like this a desperate cry for help. So the government have more incentive to cater to those kinds of majority or like those kinds of people who probably have the forces of majority. So they're more likely willing to help. But secondly, I think under outside the house, government will know that they will be obliged because A, they will be more focused focus on preventive mechanism, for example. So they're far easier for them to build dams, for example, or that to make sure that there's no times of crisis because it's very, very like hard for them to fix it. But B, they'll utilize more international connections with the UN, for example, or any other international bodies. So there's people that can help them, and they can be more because they're the only person who's going to be responsible to gain that connection. Because citizens doesn't have the like access or the epistemic access for them to gain this kind of connection. So this is a government knowing that they're the only actor for them to help. They are going to have certain responsibility and incentive for them to help. Lastly, they will utilize certain rehabilitation far more because they know they're responsible for whatever it is happened during and after the crisis. So they're far more like preventive on like this kinds of actions during the crisis because they know that they're the only actor that can help certain like citizens for them to prosper. For all those reasons, we're very proud to propose.
Right, we'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for the speech. And to continue the middle half of this debate, I'd like to call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition for their speech.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are. You may proceed.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. Premise of this debate is whether the moral obligation should fall upon the government or on the individuals of a country to donate to a crisis that occurs in a foreign nation. From side of opposition, we have to tell you why it's better for this moral obligation to exist on the people instead of the government itself. For this, let's take a look at understanding what a government is supposed to do and what they are like. What the purpose of a government is. The government of a country is supposed to be for its people, to help its people in terms of crises, and to help the people, help develop the country, help develop the own different problems that occur within the country. We think it's a bit unfair for the government to have the moral obligation to help every major crisis that occurs outside, because understand the money that the government is using is the money that it gets from the people. The money that government uses is basically from the tax revenues and donation tax revenues, right? That is basically money it takes from its own people, which means that that money should be used or utilized for the benefit of their own citizens. Understand that since this money is supposed to be helping their own citizens, and their own citizens are not all aligned with the idea of supporting another country, it's unfair for the government to spend that money when majority or not all people are aligned with or the people of the country are not going to be benefited from it. Or two, not every single person or not majority of the people are actually consenting to using this money to help someone in another country. Why is this so? Understand that you talk about US and those are developed nations, but for countries that are poor, developing nations and underdeveloped countries, the money that the government has should be utilized solely for the purpose of benefiting the country itself. Why is this more important? Because understand, in developing nations, the people are already struggling, in underdeveloped nations more so. So in this case, a large sum of money going away out from this country and to people in another country, we understand that those people do need the money, but I think it's unfair for it to go directly from the government, because these government funds are the ones who are responsible for developing their own country. That means their money should always be channeled into supporting their own country and developing its own nations. Then why then is it better for the individuals themselves to be obliged? While we understand that the obligation exists, it provides an autonomy of sorts because individuals can make decisions from themselves. So while there is a moral pressure that you feel like you should be donating to another country and you should be donating to another country, you do it out of the peer pressure that occurs to you. We think it's still better because people are still making a better decision on whether they want their money to be going out to that country or not. Why is this so? This occurs because you as an individual understand your financial capabilities as to how much you can spend or how much you can donate and how much you can or whether you have that spare income that you can spend on another country or not. But I'm sorry, I got lost there. So as an individual, while this moral pressure does work, understand that people from developing and underdeveloped nations, a majority of these people are not going to donate because simply they understand that while the moral obligation exists, they don't have the financial capability to do so. Who are going to donate? It's people who have sufficient financial capability to do so, and what they can, and thus they feel like they can contribute to helping the people on the ground there, and thus it's going to help those people. Secondly, the people of a poor nations, even if in worst case that they feel morally obliged to do so, that they need to provide some money, they will provide something that is very small, and that is still something that is within their um, financial capabilities. However, on the flip side, when a government provides the sufficient aid, it's going to be probably a large sum of money that collectively falls upon more being donated per person, uh, as opposed to when these individuals themselves decide to donate, which means that there's more money going out from the country into helping that crisis. Understand that we don't really, we don't think that should be the case, because while we understand those people are facing crisis in that country, the countries in these developing nations already have problems of their own that they need to fix. That means that this money would be much better utilized helping people on the ground on their own countries, such as people under the poverty line, people who lack education and basic shelter, stuff like that. We think this money should be spent by the government in order to help its own citizens get up on their feet first before using that money to donate to help people in a immediate crisis right now. This so why do we believe, based on the moral principle that governments should be should be only for their own people, we believe it's unfair for these and the organizations within the country should be helping their own nations. So what do we see on our side of the house? Where does so two things. Who are the stakeholders? How much money is better? Why is money better? Why are the people struggling in the crises better in these countries better off with the moral obligation? Understand, when the moral obligation is on them, it gives them the autonomy to at least have the choice of how much they want to spend on whether or not they want to spend or not. Once you put the obligation on the government, this is there still the money that came from these people. This is the tax money that the people of this country pay. So this time, the money that is being spent by the government is not no longer within their sphere of control. And I think it's better to keep these monies control over these people, because they the money that they contributed as tax was something they contributed as tax because they think this money is going to come back to them in forms of development, in forms of infrastructure, in forms of education, special education, and the healthcare system. So the point in time you shift the moral obligation over to the government, the government's donating this money goes without the complete consent of the people, and we believe the people in these countries lose out, which means that for one crisis in one country, people in 10 countries are losing out on benefits that they would have otherwise received because the money was spent without their consent. On the other side, on our side of the house, while the moral obligation falls upon these people, it allows these people to empathize, or to a certain degree empathize, but even if they do it out of the peer pressure, it's still something that they can decide on how much they want to spend and why, whether or not they want to help it or not, rather than under their side, where their money is still going into the crisis without their own consent. Proud to oppose.
Right, we'd like to thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition for that speech. And now, for the latter half of the debate, I'd like to invite the Government Whip for their remarks.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Just give me 1 minute to set up my notes. It's kind of messy. Oh, this water is full. Nice. All right. Handphone. Handphone. Okay. If you want to PR, you give it to chat. I already told you. I will swear a lot on my speech, but it's nothing offensive. It's just how I deliver my speech. So yeah. Sorry if anyone's gonna be offended for that. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. This debate was fucking messy because opposition failed to assume what is the actual definition or comparative in this debate. It's a debate about obligation, on where to put obligation in crisis. If the crisis should be mainly helped by the respective governments, i.e. Syria has to mainly help the crisis that happens there, or is the crisis should be mainly helped by the civilians of other countries, i.e. people in whichever countries, whether it's US or Indonesia, have to donate their incomes to the suffering or crisis that happens in Syria. This is a comparative that happens in this debate. Opposition defend the second one, we defend the first one. This clarification kicks out opposition claim on how the money of certain states should be fairly distributed, which is to help themselves to begin with for it to be justified. Gonna give 3 responses to this. A, I'm fucking confused because this claim is really supporting us. What they need to defend in op is civilians of other countries being obliged to help themselves. This is exactly what we're saying. That Syria should be obliged to help themselves, not that US people should be obliged to help Syria to survive from this crisis. Meaning that the money to help the crisis should literally come from the internal body of the respective states, from the government itself. Secondly, exactly by this opposition logic, then my PM suggestion easily run because US citizen then is only responsible for the economical development or the structural benefit of their states, right? They have no obligation at all to help people in Syria. But lastly, we're already charitable from PM. If people really care, we won't violate their agency to help. DPM taught you that those people, if they genuinely care, they can still help via NGO by donation. UN can still manifest the help by giving, like, safe guardians whatsoever to the crisis that happens, like what happens in Banda Aceh in Indonesia. But the only delta is we won't just force those people with the obligation that exists under the rise on that motion, right? Meaning the data is simple. On their side, you unjustifiably force people in Indonesia or Singapore to help the crisis in Syria. In our side, people from these states who voluntarily want to help those people can still come to our states in the crisis, but states will be obliged and have more incentive to protect their own people from the crisis. Proud to propose 2 things in my speech. First, how to impose obligation, who should be on, how should it be on them? Secondly, which term of obligation gives better result at the end of the day? 1. How do we impose obligation? A. The only claim that I heard from opposition is that it's hard for respective states to maintain the crisis simply because they're incapable. A. This is a blatant assertion. I never can analyze why states are not capable to begin with. The fact that Indonesia could survive, even was being so poor at the time, is shows to you that factually this is completely wrong because government could survive, right? They have like backup from internal bodies like UN. They also have like backup from their national citizens to help to be volunteers on the certain areas that got the flood or like got the earthquakes, right? Here. Secondly, I want to note that they never gave any local analysis on why just because some states are incapable, then automatically foreign citizens needs to take the blame on. They need to be the one who are obligated, right? This is heavily damaging to their case. If somebody is a value judgment debate on obligation, both sides needs to offer a parameter of obligation and which one deserves the obligation the best. They failed to prove to you who needs to get the obligation. They just simply shift the blame because they assume that states are incapable who are also wrong to begin with. Second response, first and foremost, I want to note how obligation is highly rooted by the metrics of responsibility on who get the most information to determine something, who get the most epistemic access to assess the result of something. One intuition palm for you, judges, that whoever have the most control should have the most responsibility. This is why parents are mainly obliged to raise their children rightfully, other than their friends or even states. Simply because they have the epistemic access to know that based on the precedents, abusing your children makes nothing good. It only makes your child traumatized. They're also the only one who could do action on it then to determine who they still stick with this abusive parenting or not. That's why they're responsible and obliged to raise their child right. Meaning that obligation should heavily be on those parties who have control over the result on something. Thirdly then, why this fits this logic of this debate? In this context then, the one who should be given the obligation is the government of respective countries because of the four reasons we taught you before. Because they have the most information about the crisis. They have the access to A, geologists that can identify when will the earthquake happens. 2, they also have the access on like what can we effectively do to save so many lives as possible when earthquake happens. Meaning that they're also the one who got to do all the acts to begin with, right? The one who have the epistemic access to do all this. But secondly, comparatively, foreign citizens have no control at all. They're simply just living their life. People in US are just being there to protest about like Biden, right? Sure, you cannot blame everyone for natural disasters, but if you have to pick one, when you want to give obligation, it should be on the states because they're the only one who have control and epistemic access to determine whatever happens during an earthquake or like any crisis that happens. Citizens have no control over it. Second question, on which form of obligation gives better result? I want to note that what happens when we make this trend of narratives that governments are highly responsible and obliged to help the crisis that happens under the states, it means that obligation will manifest on three steps for government. A, before crisis, B, during crisis, but lastly after crisis. How are on these three steps we're much better? A, on before crisis, DPM taught you that they will be more incentivized to do preventive mechanism. If it's true on opposite logic then that it's very hard to stay for maintaining crisis, then they will try to do their best to do prevention and mitigation of harm so the crisis won't happen, right? I.e., three steps. A. Creating more safe infrastructure for the mitigation of harm of earthquakes. B. Improving the system of drainage to mitigate the harm of landslide or mudslide. Thirdly, incentivizing the education of protecting lives on crisis risky areas, i.e. on high land that are vulnerable for volcano eruption whatsoever. Sure, by this three steps we can fully prevent like natural disasters or crisis, but mitigation of harm is still heavily accessible exactly by the state's obligation to do this. Correct is simple. In opposition, A, foreign citizens don't have access to do all this. But two, donation etc. also do not result or like translate into all these related manifestation of efforts. Only states are capable to do this. But secondly, during the crisis, they will be more incentivized to do damage control better. Because A, they will have to do more sufficient evacuation to help as many as people as better because they're heavily responsible for this. But two, they will also be more powerful to motivate their local citizens to help. In their side, when you put the obligation on foreign countries, it means that you will get many lifeguards from US. US will to no incentive for local citizens to help simply because they think that there are already like smart people from US that are gonna help those people in Indonesia. But when you put it on government, it gives incentive for the local citizens to help because other people won't help them. It's only themselves and their citizens that can help the people in Aceh to begin with. But lastly, they will be also doing more on maintaining connection with other parties, i.e. the UN or WHO or UNICEF, for example, because they're the only one that can also voluntarily help the people in this crisis when it happens. But lastly, after the crisis, they will also be able to incentivize the rehabilitation better because they know that they're the one who's responsible for the livelihood after the crisis because they're the one who are probably the most parties that have the most control over whatever happened during the crisis. We're so proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the government whip for that speech. And to conclude the final substantive speech of this debate, I'd like to call upon the opposition whip. Hear, hear.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're perfectly audible. Thank you.
All right. Starting in 3, 2. Let's start with addressing that there might have been a misunderstanding on which government is supposed to be actually funding. From side government, they seem to be later on pushing that it should be the government of the country, the crisis-ridden country. We might have pushed the argument that we were talking about the government of foreign countries. But even then, I think the ultimate debate comes down to whether or not the obligation should be on citizens from foreign countries. And we will prove to you that we do win this debate win this debate if we prove to you that the moral obligation on citizens is important, and we do prove to you that. So what are their arguments on putting obligation on government that tell us that there is going to be an increase in prevention from the crisis is happening afterwards. Understand that a vast majority of these crises are not preventable, and especially not preventable by the government of the said country, because most of these countries like Syria or Afghanistan, which are like war ridden itself, and the government itself is responsible for the crisis happening and requiring donations from outside, they are not in the position to help prevent from people going into famine and stuff like that itself. Earthquakes not preventable. Let's talk about forest fires, which are not preventable by one country itself. So talking of their entire argument about how putting pressure on the government would lead to prevention is completely irrelevant to this debate. Furthermore, they tell us that they tell us that the government will be able to survive. The government of the country will be able to survive, but just by funding, instead of getting vast donations from outside, because they give us off of one example of where Indonesia survived. But understand that's most of the times these are exceptions, because most of these crises where people need donations are crises that that are extremely difficult to get out of, and they require the basic necessities which are difficult to get into these countries, which are which are ridden by war or have natural disasters such as earthquake, right? We on the other hand we on the other hand do need to prove to you why the moral obligation on citizens is important, and why it leads to more it leads to a better world, right? So that brings to the first clash of like what this obligation looks like and why we prove to you that the moral obligation on citizens is fair. So the characterization that it comes from side opposition, government, they tell us that the obligation means that there should be a policy. If not, there should be consequences on people who are not donating to foreign countries. But understand that we are having the debate in the status quo, which means there's already a trend of civilians being obliged to donate to foreign countries. And what does this trend really look like in the status quo today? This means that once there is a crisis in a certain country, the social media attention grows more into the fundraisers, and fundraising links show up under each content. These fundraising links show up under each content with the message of like asking you to send money for donation. These are like implicit uh, obligations on you, asking you to donate for a humanitarian reason and empathize with people who are also most of the people who are affected by the crisis are also local citizens and doesn't have anything to do with diplomatic ties with the country and whatnot. So that's how you increase empathy in these in these citizens and ask them to donate something, which means there isn't any forced method. These are most like implicit obligations being pushed through social media or through other different platforms to the local people in order for them to empathize with the crises caused in other countries, right? So no now so we tell you that this moral obligation is necessary, because at the point in time you start regretting it, you shift away from this push in the social media and other platforms happening, means you don't think that people should be having that moral obligation, and this message should not be reaching the vast majority of civilians, and rather it should only be voluntary to those people who are already keeping up with the news and are willing to donate. So that's the case under their model, where they say that there would be voluntary I'll ask for it there would be voluntary donations, but that only happens when people are keeping up with the news and people are already aware, and philanthropists who are like willing to donate. But we tell you that no, there should be a push, there should be an obligation, moral obligation into the civilians. But even then, if there is moral obligation, understand that people would not be donating to the point where they run out of money to not have like any financial support for themselves, right? Yes, now
The motion states that in your site you will put the obligation on foreign citizens. It does not automatically mean that local citizens will automatically care. We taught you why exactly by putting this burden obligation to the state. This is how you certify local citizens to help more.
no, we're not talking about local citizens helping anyway. We are talking about foreign citizens helping, but through NGOs and through other organizations who are helping. So our entire debate was based on foreign citizens donating to countries such as Turkey, Syria, and Afghanistan, right? So yeah, normal citizens in those countries are already under the crisis, so there isn't much moral obligation under them anyway. So it's the foreign citizens we're talking about. So yeah, and we also talked to you about how most of the people who are voluntarily donating, even under the moral obligation where you push for them to donate, these people would not be donating to the point where the opportunity cost is too high for them to not be able to fund themselves later on, right? So we proved to you how the moral obligation works, and it ensures that there's enough fund coming in from different countries, foreigners empathizing with people who are in the crises, right? On the other hand, we also tell you about how funding this way is more efficient than funding through government, because my speakers proved to you how the opportunity cost when the government funds is a lot more, because the money that's stored in government funds most of the time have their own respective reasons to be stored, and these are not savings specifically for natural disasters. Even if there is a fund for like natural disasters or calamities or war for them to have like emergency funding, it's usually never enough, because most of the time government is mostly a system which is supposed to help people in building hospitals, schools, colleges, and whatnot. So most of the time the funding goes into those things. So when you're asking the government to pushing this moral obligation away from citizens over the world and putting it on the government, there's a higher opportunity cost, because these people, the fund from these areas are out, and they're required for the donations, right? So we proved to you how there is efficient funding under our world. We also proved to you why the moral obligation should exist, and we provide a better world. Proud to oppose. Thank you.
We'd like to thank the opposition whip for that speech. And to conclude the opposition as a whole, I'd like to invite the opposition reply speaker for their speech.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
All right, so starting in three, two, one. Right. So this debate comes out on a few aspects of which side takes the debate home, right? Understandably, we've shown to you that most crises that happen are not like human induced, and a lot of the crises, are very repetitive and it keeps coming. So it's very hard for the government in general to address the issues at hand, and because they have other problems of their own, firstly, and secondly, they don't have unlimited funds, and they can't apparently keep donating and whatnot, right? So the channel that we've shown to you, that the channel of funding that happens through citizens, is much more efficient, it's much more better and less complicated, right? Uh, on the flip side, we've also shown to you how why the moral obligation of citizens is an important incentive that pushes forward the emotional drive and pushes forward the actions of these citizens to actively donate for these causes. And we've shown to you that when the moral obligation is present on our side of the house, the funds keep coming, and the funds get like better and more smoothly to the people or the organizations that need it. We've shown to you that whenever citizens donate and the moral obligation imposed on them by our side of the house, they don't necessarily have any consequences to begin with. Meaning, they won't necessarily have any issues when it comes to donating, and it's much more better compared to the government's donating and whatnot, right? Secondly, we've shown to you that apparently the responsibility of government still exists on our side of the house, and something that the opposition bench keeps asking questions. But we've also explained through our entire bench that the government doesn't necessarily stop funding just because you put a moral obligation on the citizens and whatnot, right? Understand the importance of the status quo in today's world, where apparently citizens should have an active role into this, right? Understandably, whenever you impose a moral obligation into the citizens, we've shown to you that it's not the same as imposing a law, or it's not the same as like um, pressurizing it to that you have to pay and you don't have to pay. We also shown to you how the moral obligation in general works as a mutual transaction between the citizens of the world, when apparently you can get more or less similar feedback when you face issues, because we've shown to you that are something that is unprecedented and you cannot necessarily prevent them, so you're always going to need help and whatnot, right? So reasons why we take this bit home. Firstly, we've shown to you that we provide a better model and provide a better world for the crises to be much more better tackled. Secondly, we've shown to you that when our model is in play, pressure on governments to actively um, fund a lot of the actively fund to help a lot of the causes, it's the pressure is much less, and because it's equally distributed among the citizens now that they are donating to. And first and lastly, we've shown to you that we provide better funding in a much more smooth, less complicated and less complex manner, right? And this is why we're very proud to oppose. And good debate, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, opposition reply, for that speech. Finally, for the last speech in this debate, I'd like to call upon the government reply speaker for their speech.
Yep, am I audible? Sorry, I have to keep
Yes, you are.
I'm sorry. Yep. Um, let's make sure that everything is visible. Mhm. Starting reply in 3, 2, 1. I understand that mostly educators don't really listen to reply because that's insignificant part of the debate, but understand that this reply is very important to clarify the messiness of the debate. Suddenly, government has to do this and citizens have to do that. That's been claimed by both sides of the House. We're going to explain to you why we're better off with our mechanizations, why we've proven to you in detail as to who has the obligation and why they have to fulfill that. One clarification before to my classes, right? They told you in their very recent reply on their opposition that it doesn't mean that the government will suddenly not be responsible. But exactly, the flip logic towards that also works, right? It doesn't mean that the citizens have to be responsible towards that and obliged to be that. Therefore, imposing an obliging burden is the delta to guarantee accountability and responsibility of the involved actors. We're going to be the one to explain to you who are the ones that are more capable and should be the ones being obliged to help countries or to help their respective local people to actually rise up from the like crisis that already happened, right? That in and of itself is already a winning burden under government. Recheck your notes. Two classes I'm going to bring. A, regarding whether or not government and organization has the obligation to help their own people, but two, in regards to whether or not other citizens have the obligation to other people's lands, right? Number one, whether or not government and organizations have the obligation to help their own people. What did they tell you under government under this of the house, right? They tell you that A, government does not have the capability to be able to help because they have no capitals all of a sudden, but B, that other citizens can help other countries by donation. What did we tell you on our side of the house, right? Two things as well. A, that the government and organizations have the aid to be able to help. This looks like proper connections, diplomatic coalitions, even the money to help their own country. We also even told you, we became charitable in this debate, talking about how even if that's not the case, we told you that other countries that are more capable, other stakeholders that are more capable are able to join in regarding how UN is most likely going to be also involved, regarding how there's still going to be other coalitions such as ASEAN or NATO or even like US and their allies helping Ukraine, for instance, right? That's literally the status quo. Exactly, the fact that there are these international organizations and external parties that can help you is the reason as to why government is capable because of the connections that they have. But secondly, we told you that inherently government holds a responsibility to protect its own people because the reason as to why some people are suffering is to the lack of prosperity the government is this failed to give to them. Is the reason as to why some people are more vulnerable than the other is because of how government treats the people, right? The way is very simple in this one. A, we told you why government is the more likely stakeholder to be able to help and the one that's more capable to help, right? I think that in and of itself in this clash, it's very clear to you as to who's been able to explain the likelihood of giving help in and of itself, right? Secondly, if you were to compare donation and actually actively getting aid by governments, I think that it's very clear who won, right? We've even told you regarding how when government is able to like collect other areas who are not, for example, affected by the damage to help the area with damage, for instance. Therefore, that's at the very least, that's the form of incentive that local citizens are able to do to help their fellow area that's actually in trouble, right? I think that in and of itself, we've mechanized to you even as to how the impact is going to be crystallized. They haven't told you as to why donation will suddenly turn into help, right? We question that throughout the entire debate, never been answered. Second clash, let's talk about whether or not citizens have the obligation to donate to others' lands, right? Two things. A, they told you that donation from foreign citizens is goods towards the people. They have the moral obligation to be helping, yada, yada, yada. What did we tell you on the other side of the house, right? Three things. That A, literally, what you do when you incentivize government or oblige government is that you push a good preventive measure so that government don't want to so that government in the future will have to take accountability the moment that crisis has happened, right? Because obviously they want to avoid the crisis. But secondly, even when it happens, I think that they incentivize local citizens to help. They incentivize their local power to help, for instance, their connections, for instance, to help the crisis that happens within that land, because they're the ones more capable to be able to do that. But thirdly, we also told you regarding how even at the end of the day, there's going to be more responsibility within the local system to do rehabilitation towards the impact of the cases because they know what to fix, they know what to reflect on, right? The wing is simple two things. A, donation is good, it's an assertion on their side of the house, do not credit this, never crystallize. But secondly, we told you as to how the form of rehabilitation and fulfillment of responsibility will be better under our side of the house, literally mechanized. Very proud to win.
Right, we'd like to thank all speakers for the lovely debate. With that being said, speakers are welcome to leave the room while the panel gets the decisions. The results will be announced in the hall. Best of luck to both teams. Also, there's an announcement which I will type in the chat. Please comply with the instructions. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.